everybody. Welcome back for episode number 9 of my podcast, Putting the Horse First. My name is Isabel Salas, and in this podcast, I had a lovely conversation with Emma Lemon. Emma is located in New Mexico, where she runs her Haven Equine Services. She introduces young people to horseback riding through equestrian vaulting. We discussed the genesis of her vaulting program. She explained to me where you can get vaulting barrels and kits. So if you're starting your own vaulting program and wanted to know how you get kits to make your barrels up for practice, she'll explain that. She also explained she was mentored into using positive reinforcement in her lesson program by her involvement with Shelby Dennis, a horse trainer that she found on YouTube. Support and encouragement to make her lesson program positive reinforcement based. So Emma and I had a wonderful conversation, and I hope you enjoyed it. I put information about Emma's business and the vaulting company and Shelby Dennis's program all in the show notes. So I hope you enjoy.
I met you on the, I think, Mustangs with positive reinforcement page, right?
Yes.
So why don't you tell me, before we start chatting about that, tell me a little bit about what your background with horses is and how you got into it, how you got into Mustangs and positive reinforcement.
Awesome. Yeah. So I started riding when I was maybe 6 years old. I just had the horse bug. Like I just bugged parents to no end. And I believe they took me on like a trail ride, like a guided trail ride. And I just was totally in love. And that trail ride didn't go so well. I didn't know how to ride, and we were on like these really tight paths up a mountain, and I was really scared, and they were like, please, the horse got spooked and kind of almost went off, and I stopped him and stuff. So
oh dear.
I think my parents thought I maybe would be over it at that point, but I was not. So I started taking lessons with a local lady. I've grown up in New Mexico my whole life.
Okay.
And she would take me out like in the pinyons on trail rides, and that's pretty much all we did. And then her and my mother got together and got me a pony, and she was the devil. She would dump me every day. It took me hours to catch her. She's just like a really pretty pony, and I was the only one who could get on her because I was small, so it was difficult. So I would say I was taught like some grit and some tenacity, because for me, it didn't feel like anything crazy, but I remember my parents eventually being like, okay, let's get you like something trained. And so my next horse was an older schoolmaster, and she really took care of me and let me do just really whatever I wanted, which was mostly trail riding. And then after I had her and she was getting into retirement, I decided to get an off-the-track thoroughbred. And she was very difficult, just really high anxiety, a couple quirks, like freaking out when she's tied. So we just never did, because for the most part, she was good with everything. And that's at the point where I got into dressage. I got a dressage trainer. And really what we were working on is just more her body being balanced so she could calm down. And that's really what I got out of dressage, is like my body being in the right place to allow my horse to do what they need to do. And that was a really difficult journey, but at least I had a trainer at this time. Didn't have one up until that point. And with that mare in my teen years, I started giving riding lessons, just basics to other kids and things like that. I was probably 16, and I definitely thought I knew what I was doing, but at 27, I keep learning something every few months that's really life-changing. So I went ahead and did that. And then one of my little sisters, she did trapeze, and she was too small to ride my big thoroughbred. And so we started getting into equestrian vaulting, which is gymnastics.
Very
on horse.
exciting.
And I just found that to be what I mostly do now for lessons and things, is we really focus on our vaulting and our vaulting team. I just find it's like a really all-inclusive and affordable way for kids to get into the sport and kind of learn balance and relaxation and a good seat and some bravery before being let loose to ride.
Yes.
Because you have so many different pieces you have to think about when you're learning to ride properly. So I really love that. And then just a few years ago, 4 years ago, I got my first Mustang. I was looking for a lesson horse, and she was at the local horse rescue, and she had just been adopted and thrown out in pasture, and she had foundered out there. So we spent quite a while just fixing her body, and she had to lose a lot of weight and things like that. And so during that time, we couldn't do much. And I had a very difficult time with Mustangs. But I had mostly like off the track thoroughbreds before that. And even though they have their quirks, they've done a job and they know their job. And usually with training them, it's more teaching them a new job. But with the Mustangs, you really have to convince them it has to be consensual. They really need to want to do it. And I probably spent a couple years working through some different things with her without positive reinforcement. And it is just a lot more difficult, especially because when I would ask for help, people would tell me to do things that I just felt were going to do the opposite of good, but I didn't know what to do. But I did go ahead and get her trained, and she turned into just the best lesson horse, best vaulting horse, especially. And then I got another Mustang, and he was supposedly trained. And when I first got him, he seemed really good. But what I came to find out was he wasn't exactly good. He was shut down. He was traumatized. And I would never say that anybody did that to him, but there just are horses who have a bad time in traditional training. So he had gone to a colt starter and then come to me as a very docile, mellow guy, I thought, but it turns out he was in some pain. He had some ulcers. He really had a lot of problems going on. And since he didn't think he could just be a horse and let me know what was going on, I just got no information from him. But after a few months, he started biting people for no apparent reason that I could see. Like, you go into it just to clean it, and he would go and bite you pretty hard, things like that. And I was at a total loss. And then I started looking into positive reinforcement training or behavioral training from the context of dogs. Like, I didn't even know they did that with horses for some reason, which makes no sense. We do it with all kinds of animals. But I really did some studying, and I still felt like I didn't know what was going on, but I went ahead and tried it. And it has just given me like so many new tools to work with, forced me to be more creative, to try to set the situation up to be positive for them. And this horse has not gone back into my lesson program because he's happy with me and he's working through these traumas, but he's not biting people anymore. He's happy to be touched in things, which he was not before. He's really coming out of hell and able to understand that I will listen and that he can also listen.
There's so much good stuff there. I don't even know where to start. I'm so excited that you're a vaulting instructor. That is such economical, as you say, a place for people to start. Also, as an instructor, you have several people who can use one horse, and putting people in a place where they can really get their bodies figured out. On riding instructor pages, there'll be incident after incident of people posting, my student can't post, they can't canter, somebody like hanging on with their hands in a saddle that probably really doesn't fit the rider well, because what lesson program has saddles that are really going to suit each rider who sits? That would be impossible. So starting out vaulting, it's really such a great way to start lesson students. And that really does put the horses first, because you're getting the students to a place where they have a certain level of competence before you're cutting them loose on the horse and expecting the horse to deal with them. So much is put on lesson horses to have to cope with riders who don't ride well. And yes, it is hard to find good lesson horses, because finding a horse who can put up with someone who doesn't ride well, who's going to sit crookedly, who's going to bounce on their back, who's going to pull on their mouth. That's a lot to ask the horse. That is so exciting that you start your lesson students with vaulting. Also, the issue that you pointed out, which is such a huge issue, the difference between animals who are shut down versus animals who can sit. And so much of the training tradition in the United States, at least, comes from putting animals into a state of shutdown. Told in the beginning that you don't have a right to have an opinion, you do what I say, period, which is a very different thing from trying to get them to consent and cooperate in the training process. Now, granted, the consent-based model is trickier for us as humans. It requires a much higher level of learning and understanding, which is definitely a barrier for us as we try to encourage people. One of my goals with this podcast is to try to figure out ways to get people on board with making the horse's consent to be a high priority in their training program. For me, I just lucked out that I'm very untalented and unskilled by nature. So from a young age, I was kind of somewhat pushed in the direction of I have to get the horse to kind of agree with me because there's not enough of me to make a horse do anything. I'm not athletic enough. So it was kind of a thing I fell into just a little bit from the time that I was young up until now. And I can understand how people who are really talented, this is just not something that occurs. They're so athletic and they're so skilled. If the horse doesn't agree, they don't care so much. But that is so cool. It's so exciting that you're a vaulting instructor and that you start your students that way. And it's so cool that you recognize that Mustang was shut down. Because traditionally, we would have described that as a great horse. He does everything that you say and they have no objections. And they just sit there and they're just like, okay, whatever, I just do, which is very different from the consensual model. I'm hoping to try to sell it to people, even people who are upper level participants, that they can get more out of the animal if the animal is in a cooperative, consensual way. Probably seen videos of people doing whatever upper level sport, barrel racing, jumpers, and the rider and the horse are in a lot of conflict the whole time. Somebody's galloping down to the base of the fence, they're pulling like crazy on the horse's mouth, they're bouncing on the back, and the horse obviously can't even give its best performance in those kind of conditions. So even if like your only goal is a high performance thing, you can't get everything out of the animal when it's in that kind of state. And for sure, it's very unfortunate that we start out our beginners telling them that that's the ideal thing, that the horse should have no opinion. And have you been working in anybody's programs for positive reinforcement? Did you look at Alexander Curlin or Mustang Maddie? There's a lot of different stuff out there right now.
Yeah, I would say I got most of my information at the beginning from some dog trainers I knew. And then after that, who I started following was Shelby Dennis. She's at Milestone Equestrian. She put out a ton of content that's free on like YouTube, TikTok. And it's interesting because she has had a whole journey where she switched to positive reinforcement. And she does a lot of work talking about just wrapping our minds around it, because I understood the concepts, but I was still terrified. I was just terrified of the logistics of like, I'm already running a riding program. How do I integrate this? I'm telling my students something completely different now out of nowhere and telling them, don't ride my horse. He's the guy I would put on in the arena loose because he would just listen, no problems, walk around mellow. And then suddenly this horse is completely different and I have to pull him out of the program. And then I had to shut down for a few months to get my main lesson horse going with the treats, obsessing over the treats, especially because she's metabolic. And so strict diet all the time. She's always wanting for food. A big part of making all this work was setting up their environment and figuring out how I could keep her eating enough to be okay with that. Very little things that I just got these like little tidbits and encouragement that it was working for her, and she had switched from traditional methods and jumping and things to letting her horses consent completely. And the biggest thing for me was I recognize this horse is shut down and has these traumas, but how do I fix that? Especially if they won't engage with me, even with positive reinforcement. They have to slowly come out of their shell and start learning again. When you're in the middle of that, it feels like it'll never end. And if you don't have someone supporting you, it feels like you don't know what the end result will be. So how do you go forward? These people offering that information for free and that I could keep up on regularly and just get encouragement was really important. And then another person I really like who's at the positive reinforcement place we're talking about is called Terra Nova, and her name is Shauna Karash. And she has a really wonderful podcast where she doesn't just talk about the theory and the basics, but she really like takes you through all of the sessions she does. And she'll even like pause the podcast to be like, go grab these things and meet me out here. And just, I'm farther at this behavior than you are, and things like that, where she really takes you by the hand and you can sit along and kind of practice these things.
That's awesome. That's so cool. I can't believe that's I shouldn't say I can't believe. That is amazing that you found another riding instructor. I will absolutely have to look her up. So Shelby Dennis at Milestone Equestrian. I have been to one Shauna Carreras clinic to audit. I have not listened to her podcast. I listened to Equiosity with Alexander Kurland, The Willing Equine for Dog People, Hannah Brannigan. There's so much stuff out there now. There literally is almost too much. I can fall prey to just being a glutton and listening to podcasts all day long. But that is totally amazing that you incorporated it into your programs. How long ago was it when you first made the change, and how long have you been doing it now?
So I started experimenting with it, like with a horse that was not rideable almost 2 years ago. And then I put it all into my program with the lesson horse I do use just this year. And I shut down for a few months to see how that would go. Was just having a hard time figuring out how I was going to get my students to do it and train them properly. And I was just needing probably a month or two to work on the basic behavior of the headset and the being polite with treats. And after that, we were going to move on. And I was scared that we would never get off of treats or that I couldn't. But the more research and things and encouragement I get from others is that intermittent reinforcement works best. And so we have to make sure that we have the really strong behavior of the horse not being anxious about the food. But once we have that piece, I pulled her out at sunset yesterday and didn't give her any treat, but I got to give her a jackpot because I gave her dinner right afterward. Find a way that it works for you and not worrying too much about that, as long as you get that first piece. It's really
cool. That is, do you have a website or anything? Do you have a website or are you on Facebook?
Yes, it's called Haven Equine Services, and it's havenequine.com. And right now it just has my information, but I will be adding some free resources on there for especially that piece I was talking about.
Shelby Dennis, Milestone Equestrian. So she put a bunch of free stuff on YouTube. Does she offer any kind of paid program? Does she do an online course, or does she offer coaching and stuff too?
She sure does. So she has a Patreon, and that's called Shelby Dennis or Milestone. You can find her on YouTube and it'll link you there. It's just Shelby Dennis. Dennis is Dennis, but she has like one-on-one coaching, I believe, like group coaching calls, and it just depends on like what tier you pick. But she has a lot more in-depth on everything she does on YouTube there, and then you can also like ask questions or send in video depending on what you need.
So going back to the vaulting, because geez, yes, that's always been a dream of mine to have the vaulting lesson program. So you have, let's see, so you can probably do a fair number of lessons with one horse. How many horses do you need for your program?
So I would really like to get another, but it is so hard to train a horse to do that. It takes a while. It's a lot of strength. They need to be worked up like a dressage horse to that level of like strength. And then some we hate just going around in circles all day. It just takes a long time. I have the one vaulting horse right now, and I do 2-hour classes where the first hour, when we have groups, they're working on gymnastics and a fake horse to work on their routines and things.
Gotcha.
So I don't make my horse work more than an hour. I warm them up during that time. And like my biggest priority is the horse and their comfort. So I get them to do those things on the barrel to a point where they're not going to be jabbing the horse with their knees or anything like that. If they're not strong enough to do it, we're not doing it. We do listen to the horse. We have a class about every other day. I try to give her a day off in between.
So, by random luck, I actually had a horse trained and sold that went to a vaulting program. He was a Pinto draft, like 16 hands, round as a barrel guy with like a tiny little pitter-patter canter. That, yes, it did take me a long time to teach him to canter on the lunge. Being a draft cross, and he's only 16 hands, but he either came out very drafty or he was 3/4 draft, because he was drafty and round. So yeah, he had a nice tiny little canter, but it took was very slow process for him to really just be able to keep cantering on the lunge well. How many kids are you doing at one time? So do you have a group of kids, like 6 kids in a lesson, or?
I had tried 6. I found it was just too chaotic. And so now we're doing 4 kids max. And that way they can work in pairs together, and then they can get on the horse. Like they just kind of rotate, right? Like a vaulting team would, to do a team performance. But I will definitely be doing doing bigger classes when we have some more kids who advance through the program and are on our actual vaulting team, because they do have to learn to like do a class with 8 people, go to clinics, go to shows, and all work together in like a group. Routine would be like 6 to 8 people getting on and off that horse in the 3 minutes. So kind of work them up to it. The younger kids have a harder time keeping them focused with too many kids.
Gotcha. So how difficult, are you very handy? How difficult was it for you to make your practice barrel? Because I know you basically have to build those yourself, right?
You do. A student's dad has built some wooden ones, and I was actually able to pick up some barrels from other teams who weren't using them anymore. If you can find someone who welds, you can make a barrel. No problem. It's just 2 5-gallon drums stuck together. And then I prefer to just put a surcingle on there because you're not going to have the same proper handles. But like my team was talking about it, so we're thinking about needing more barrels, and it's actually more cost effective versus the cost of building one to just get one of those kits. I think the difference is like $200, but you end up with a surcingle that has the competition handles that fits the barrel, and everything fits, and the barrel's adjustable and it has cover and everything. So I probably spending the same amount of money, like continuing to replace the cover on our barrel and not having the proper handles. And
so somebody actually sells a whole kit that you can put on the barrel to use for the vaulting training. Is that what you mean?
They can either send you a whole kit to put on the barrel based on the size of it, or they can send you a whole barrel. And I love them because they're adjustable. We'll be able to like take them to events, things like that. Can adjust the height of it.
All right. Oh, that's cool. So now, did you go through any instruction? Did you just learn yourself as you were going with your students, or did you go to like a vaulting instructor's certification thing, or how did that work?
Mostly we're just mentored into it. There's a couple yearly conferences we can go to get like some one-on-one instruction with Olympic coaches. And then there's therapeutic assisted vaulting, and you can get certified through the PATH.
Gotcha.
Now they do things a little different. It's for therapy. Safety's a different thing there. They don't do as many tricks, and they wear helmet. And we do not use helmets for any kind of competitive vaulting because the studies have shown us it actually causes more injuries. The vaulting community is just amazing, friendly, welcoming, and there aren't a lot of us. There's one other team in my whole state. Usually the case. And so when my little sister wanted to get into it, I contacted the only team I could find. And she actually came up to my house, which is like 3 hours away, stayed with us for the week, brought her equipment, and just first and showed me how to do it and how to train a horse.
Wow.
If you ask anybody in the vaulting community, they will like bend over backwards to give you whatever information you need. And I'm still able to just keep in touch if I have questions. And then like the other team here usually does like a mock competition that we can go to, like a clinic. And then I love the community because they've made it so accessible to compete. They have online competition, and even if you don't have a horse, I mean, you can compete completely on barrels. So sometimes we have competitions indoors with no horses.
Yeah, that definitely takes one issue out there of transporting the horses around and stuff. All right, that's cool. Oh my goodness, I had no idea you did the vaulting. That is just so exciting. You got a double-barreled approach to putting the horse first there. Now with the positive reinforcement and with starting all of your students. So you start students exclusively with the vaulting? You don't teach any other way?
So I've been just mostly focused on the vaulting program. And part of that is like my one lesson horse can only take so much.
Yes.
So it just helps a lot more kids to be offering that service. They offer private instruction where you don't have to start off vaulting if you're, telling me you're an intermediate rider and you want to work on something specific. Then I do things that are in more of a therapeutic context to help you or get over an injury or things like that. But if you've never ridden a horse before, yes, I'm going to insist you do vaulting or at least like some lunge lessons.
That's amazing. So amazing that you got into the vaulting, that you've had so much success with it, and then that you got into the positive reinforcement through your Mustang work there. So I've already kept you here for more than half an hour. Is there anything else you want to talk about or say before I'll let you go?
The last thing I forgot to mention is just that I have a disability. I broke my spine when I was maybe 12 or something like that.
Oh, wow.
I've lost some feeling. It never healed right. And then I went and broke my ankle around the same time I started looking into positive reinforcement. And I was going around giving lessons in a boot, and I'm still not over it. Like, I'm still getting back into riding myself. Positive reinforcement allowed me to be as creative as I wanted about like any behaviors I needed to help me with my back. Like, I have my horses put their legs up on a mounting block for me to clean out because I can't do it. And with the positive reinforcement, it's just like anything I need like that, I can maintain or get really lickety split, and it just gives you a path. Create whatever behaviors you want. And for me, that's meant training my horse not to use my legs as much because I can't feel them. I don't have the strength I used to. And so it kind of aligns, all of that aligns together.
Thanks for bringing that up. That's really important point, and definitely could help to motivate some other folks. With you talking about that, it made me think of one more question. So a lot of people, when they think of positive reinforcement, and if they don't like it or they're concerned about it, one of the things they're worried about is horses becoming pushy, getting into your personal space, becoming pushy and nippy and mugging you for treats. So what would you say to somebody who's concerned about that?
I would say that if we're still having that problem, then we just haven't done something quite right. And that's why we use the behavioral science and we listen to people who have done it and gone through it and got to the other side. And another thing to think about is like, you still should have that behavior. You should still have a horse that's polite. They're going to encounter treats in their life. For instance, I used to have my mare boarded at a public stable, and I know that this old lady used to go around and feed all the horses carrots, right? And so if I had done that base behavior, which is, it takes a while, it's frustrating, it's kind of boring. But what I do is I do it for maybe a minute a day, right? I start off by going out before feeding time, and they're real excited about the treats, and I stay on the other side of the fence and I will wait until they back off. What I want for my horses there is to accept treat in a neutral headstand, and that sets you up for all that, and also not stick their head through the fence or at you. That's how you're creating that scenario, but just doing it right before feeding time really quick and then moving on with your life. But we have to do more of that thing until it overrides that previous behavior. And so it takes time and patience. But once you have that, even if you don't want to use positive reinforcement or treats for your training, it gives you a baseline of being polite with treats and not being pushy for food. And I think we all want that.
We do. That was an excellent answer. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer that extra question. I like your point about the behavioral science and listening to other people who have been down the road and who can help you out. That's very important. A lot of folks are starting out the positive reinforcement and they're not getting any help or any coaching, which I think is definitely a big problem. Part of the issue why some people get into it and then they get back out of it. That's your second point about just every horse can learn to be polite with treats is really important. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. You were awesome. I had no idea you did the vault thing. That is so cool. And you were a fantastic guest to have here. So we mentioned your website. It was havenequine.com.
So I'm in Edgewood, New Mexico. I'm kind of equidistant from Albuquerque and Santa Fe. So I travel to train to both on some online resources. And the first one is going to be just about a baseline of being polite with treats and some cooperative care.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.